Well, happy Thursday, everyone. Maxwell, we're back.
We're back. It's episode 4 of Center Mezzanine. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you're joining us live, that's great. If you're watching it another time, that's okay too. We want you to be able to watch this whenever you want, whenever it's comfortable for you. We're here for you.
I mean, and here's the thing. It's the pandemic still. We're all still dealing. We're still living, and we're hoping that you guys are just here to have a good time, and whatever that means, whenever it is, that doesn't really matter. We just want to have fun.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about this show that we've been doing is, the channel is primarily movie focused, but I work in theater, I produce stuff, I know a lot of people, and every time we air an episode, when someone who we know through the movie community says, "Oh, I learned something," or "I didn't know that," that's what excites me. Like being able to educate or introduce people to things they don't know about, or a different side of the entertainment industry that they're not as familiar with, is what has been so gratifying about this. So before we get started with our guest, we have a couple of housekeeping notes and announcements for the next couple of days in the channel.
Yep.
You want to handle that, PJ?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, you're already here at Front Center Mezzanine, but if you haven't seen our last episode with Mr. Joe Iconis, please go and check it out. It was a ton of fun. I learned a lot, and I think you guys will too if you haven't seen it. Last night, Suddenly Soundtracks came back. It was not the aforementioned Newsies. We actually had a surprise. We did Rocket Man last night. Chris Clark and his band of misfits got to talk all about the Elton John film. And then next week, it will be back next Wednesday. It is going to be Newsies with the aforementioned Kevin Smets, Robert Parker, and Kristen Smith. You guys are in for a treat.
Of course, who was a child in the original Newsies film. So he has a lot of insight into what it was like being on the set of that, talking about experiences and all of Alan Menken's great tunes in that musical.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited about that. It's going to be a ton of fun. Of course, tomorrow night, we are going to be doing a watch-along of Brad Bird's Tomorrowland as we bring Brad Bird Month slowly to a close. It'll finish off on Monday with The Incredibles double feature, which will be starting at 5 p.m. instead of 7, as we normally do. And for some godforsaken reason, we have decided to bring back Family Feud one more time. I don't know, Max, how are you feeling?
The first time we did it, it was such an epic disaster. I kept calling it the stream that goes wrong, an obvious riff on the play that goes wrong, because nothing worked. The ceiling was falling in. No one knew what was happening, and yet it was still so joyous. So maybe it'll be even more fun, considering we've had time to work on it. And I know Chris Clark, our graphics extraordinaire, has been putting in a lot of time into making sure it goes smoothly and is more visually interesting. Plus, this time, instead of just using random questions from like game packs, we have surveyed 30 people from our community. So we will have active live survey answers that'll make it even more exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting. I'm excited to see how that comes together. Of course, we also do have our iTunes and Spotify feed with all of our shows. You can catch the audio versions of them if you have not already. We also have the PJ Campbell Show, which will be on Sunday. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be doing it about yet, but I'm sure Maxwell and I will figure it out in the meantime. And then next Tuesday, Evan DeGraff will be back doing Famous Last Words. But finally, one last thing. If you guys did not see our watch along of Ratatouille on Monday, we made a pretty big announcement, Max.
We sure did. Hashtag Scary Movie Squad. All throughout September and October, we are going to be watching slasher films in September, horror films in October. I don't know about you, but I think we're still pretty much going to be staying inside and being safe from the pandemic over the next few months. So Halloween, I don't know if it's going to happen, but it's going to happen on the PJ Campbell Network for 2 straight months. So join us, get your popcorn ready, and it's going to be spooky good time.
Yeah, I'm really excited, especially because, I'm a huge horror buff, so are you, and this was our way of celebrating the spooky season in a way that I think only we could. Of course, if you guys see on there, we are doing a Halloween night double feature on a Saturday. That is something we have never done before, and that is because we expect we'll probably be inside on Halloween with everyone else. So why not celebrate Halloween with Trick or Treat and Halloween 2018? It feels like it's fitting, and we have so many great guests coming along with the ride, as you saw, Mark Riley, Tim Franco, Chris Clark is going to be on all of them, which never happens. Teresa is going to be back. James White will be back. William Bibiani is going to be here. It's a very stacked panel for a lot of really great films, and it's going to be a ton of fun, man. But with that, I think that we've got this stuff out of the way now. What do you think? Yeah. Should we bring our guest in?
Yeah, I think we're here to talk about theater. That's what I like talking about more than anything.
Yeah. All right.
You may know him from The Great Comet. You may know him from Alice by Heart. You may know him from Jesus Christ Superstar. You may know him from I don't know, maybe does not play well with others. It is the one and only Heath Saunders.
Oh, I pulled up the wrong thing. There it is. We're good.
Well,
We
hello.
made it through. Hello.
Look, here we
Hello.
are.
How are you doing
Bat on
this
my
evening?
face. Oh, you know, I'm still alive, which is a gift. I
That is a
guess.
gift. Every day I wake up, I'm like, I did it again. Congratulations.
Look, we're here.
We're here.
We're having fun.
Indeed.
That's our aim here, at least. We try to go for the fun and surviving day by day through
Oh
whatever
my God,
this
speaking
is.
of fun, y'all are just doing the most out here. I had
We
just
really
no
are.
idea. You guys just listing things. I was like, how are you doing this many things?
Well,
I do one thing a day and I get very stressed.
I think, when the pandemic all started, like so much of what made my life and I think PJ's life, if I can speak on his behalf, exciting, sort of got stripped away.
Hmm.
So we wanted to create a platform, the channel, where we can engage with our friends, engage with people who like the same things we do, and it
Yep.
gives us something to look forward to, because some of these days are real dull and boring, and the anxiety and depression can take over. But if I have a stream or a show to look forward to at the end of the night, whether we're going to watch a movie or play Family Feud or talk to someone super cool such as yourself, it,
Oh,
it,
God.
help, it helps me get going, so
No, it absolutely does. I feel the exact same way. And I mean, thank you for the kind words. Like, that means a lot.
No, I'm just very impressed. Also, I'm like, this will come up as we talk, but I love horror films as a genre, and part of the reason that I love horror films is actually because I consider them and musicals two of the most clear genres of art for me, which we'll get into later. But
I love everything
that's
about
something to
that.
look forward to.
Well, if you decide you want to be on any of those watch-alongs, let us know. We'll throw you on.
Hiya.
It's interesting because this is only our 4th episode, but I think everyone we've talked to thus far has made a similar through line between horror and musicals, or at least a shared love between them. Obviously, our first guest was Preston Max Allen, who loves horror. He wrote a slasher musical, so it doesn't get any better than that, combining two of the best things. But how have you just been handling this whole pandemic thing over the last few months?
It's funny. I think that the question that is like, how are you handling the pandemic is sort of like misleading, because I think that the pandemic is one arm of a gigantic social upheaval that's been happening, across the country, across the world, which is actually, as a sort of macro thing, is much harder to deal with for me than the actual pandemic. Because for me, like, social distancing from people is like my favorite thing in the world. I don't want to see you. I don't want people to see me. Life is great. Like, at the end of the day, I made this joke early on in quarantine, which is that I hope hugging never comes back. Like, unexpected hugging, it was like the bane of my existence as a child, and it wasn't until I got into theater and everybody does it that I just had to deal with it. So I just have gotten over it, basically. But now I don't have to hug strangers, and I really like that. I'm very here for it, and I'm probably never gonna have to hug strangers again.
Yeah,
we're very, very excited about that factoid.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't mind hugging, but I'm not a big fan of handshakes.
Yeah.
I honestly, in some ways, I find a handshake even more intimate than a hug, because
that's funny.
With a hug, I don't know. I don't like, you never know where someone's hand's been, but at least with a hug, you're not actively, you're probably touching their clothing.
Fair. But the thing about what I will say about handshakes is that handshakes are just an aggressive power move, and it just cracks me up.
Absolutely.
Like, everything about a handshake is like, look how big my penis is. Am I allowed to say that on your?
Yes, absolutely.
Whatever you want.
Filter here, I promise you that.
Great.
Yeah,
it just seems so extreme.
I was raised to, not only by my parents, but through school and everything, you have to give a strong, firm handshake. And I find so many people overcompensate with that. You can give me a fine handshake without breaking my fingers.
I'm sort of very here. One of the things, my brother met Obama, and while Obama was president, which is just sort of funny. And one of the things that he talks about, the thing that my brother noticed about it, was that Obama has the most amazing handshake of his life. And I was like, that is fascinating. That is corporate America in a nutshell.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That person has a really great handshake, and that means that they're great. Which I don't want to get super political on here. So.
No, please.
No. I mean, I don't want to get super political.
Yeah. Fair. Understandable.
That's fine. Yeah, there's so many times where if I was interviewing someone for a job or vice versa, you always hear well, I don't know, because their handshake was who cares?
Oh, I care.
One's
That's
handshake. I don't as much, but that's fair. Yeah, so it seems like you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, I'm all right. It's all things considered. I have discovered that I also really like thrive doing virtual concerts. Like like for some reason I've been doing a couple of shows with Times Square NYC. They do this thing called Broadway Buskers, and I just got to do a performance this week, and everyone is like, oh, I'm gonna play my guitar and sing a couple songs, and I was like, that sounds fun, that's cool. And for my first Broadway Buskers event, I basically wrote this song called Stuck in a Loop, which you can hear on Spotify if you go and check it out, Heath Saunders on Spotify. But I wrote this song, and for part of my performance, I did this whole light show. I did this choreographed light show thing, and people were like, "That's crazy!" And I was like, "This is the best." And so for my Broadway Buskers thing, I did a 20-minute. I basically made this video, and I did the whole thing in front of a television, and did this whole interactive with projection design thing. And people were like, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "Look, I do not play well with others. If you heard my EP, then you know this is true about me. And now I don't have to play with others. So it works out brilliantly." All I'm saying is that the pandemic works out well for me. On the other hand, the social upheaval of the world has not worked out as well for me, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Being, a black-bodied person in America.
Yes.
Not great.
It's been emotional, it's been challenging, and there's been a lot of hard conversations, but the hard conversations need to be had, because if you don't have them, we're never going to be able to move forward and find a more equitable, more progressive, more common ground for anybody. It's been something I've been having sleepless nights over.
We have 3 a.m. Zoom calls sometimes,
Yeah.
just between us, because we're always just talking about the stuff going on. I deal with anxiety and depression. I've been going through a divorce over the last year and stuff like that. And so stuff like this on top of it has just been a lot. And it's finally also time for the country to quit sweeping stuff under the rug like it's been trying to do and pretending the stuff isn't happening. But at the same time, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Yeah,
imagine how we feel. Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
I can't even imagine. I'm a super empathetic person, and that's something I talk with my therapist a lot, is I let the weight of the world affect me in a really negative way, and I'm working on trying to separate out my own issues with the grander sociological issues, and it's been tough. I can't imagine how you feel. What I can say is, aside from all that, there's been such an upswing in anti-Semitism over the last few years. So I've been dealing with that at the same time. It's been a messy, hard, painful time for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yes, and we're very, very bad at talking about it.
Yes.
Which is 80% of my work right now, is helping people talk about it, as it were. Because I think, I think we find ourselves in a position where we don't feel like we have the language to effectively express our experiences with the thing. I would offer in this moment, for example, it's interesting that your language says, I can't imagine how you feel. And I understand the sentiment behind that. And I appreciate the sentiment behind that, because essentially what that is and forgive me for calling you out in this particular way.
Please.
What that is sort of white-bodied people seeing a black body and saying, I can't imagine your experience, which is a fair, true statement. But I also believe, conversely, as a storyteller, that my job as a storyteller is actually about helping people imagine things that they haven't experienced. And actually, I think human capacity for empathy and human capacity for imagination is actually remarkable. And that's part of the space that I start in with this, which is that you are not actually separate from this experience because it's not happening to you. This experience is happening to all of us as people. And so if we can sort of create a space where that's the neutral, rather than the neutral is you experience X and I experience Y, it helps us actually comprehend the conversation that we're trying to have. Because again, there's a truth to, there are things that you will never experience. There are things that you will never understand in those regards. There are things that you can't imagine. But at the same time, the neutral is that we want to build empathy between people. We want to build the language of empathy between people. And that sort of is a lot of what I like.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I find that interesting because, I've said similar things to other people who feel differently than you. So I think it's interesting to hear that perspective, because I never want to put myself in someone else's shoes and assume that I know the past that they walked. I know the past that I walked. I know the pains that I felt. as a Jewish person, as a bisexual person, a lot of the stigmas that I faced for those things. And certainly there is some common ground because any marginalized group has shared experiences, right?
Right. But what I would actually, what my point is actually not that any marginalized group doesn't have a specific set of experiences. It's that the thing that connects marginalized groups is not actually their marginalization. So when we think about it in terms of like for me in this moment, if you offer your experiences as a Jewish person as analogous or the way into my experiences as a Black person, we actually have this immediate breakdown because the identity of Jewishness is actually very different than the identity of Blackness, and which is actually a thing that just this last week, the whole thing with Nick Cannon blows up. The thing that happens with anti-Semitism within the Black community isn't actually because of the thing. It's because anti-Semitism and racism actually don't operate the same way. And when we think about them as though they do, you go into these spaces where you're like, how could these people be racist, or how could these people be anti-Semitic when in fact they have experienced oppression? And the fact of the matter is that it's actually the connections. We're not actually connecting the two things effectively, because the experience of race as a Black body is one of essentially an identity being given to you by America as a whole. The experiences of Jewishness as an identity is actually built into culture, and it's built into your religion, and it's built into this sort of shared traumatic history in the world right now. And that those two things aren't, again, they're not, it's not that there isn't connection between the two of them. It's that and I think that you can imagine, as even in the space of like the oppression, not oppression in quotes as in oppression is not real, but the oppression of bisexuals within the LGBT community is because there's this weird sense that there's a homogeneity to the experience of an LGBT or T person, when in fact it's actually just dominated by white gays. So it's like you end up in this and I mean white gay male-bodied people more than I mean anything else, but like they are the people who have defined what it means to be LGBT, and then it becomes this weird thing where people are like, well, I as X type of person experience X, Y, and Z. And I'm not saying that any of these attempts to find shared language aren't noble. I am very here for the attempts to find shared language, but I am also very here to dismantle the notion that our identities preclude our ability to communicate about experiences.
Interesting. Okay.
Wow. That was so much to unpack at one time in the right way. Like I feel like I'm learning so much, and we just got here, and I love everything about this. So,
oh boy,
wow.
you did not know what you were in for in front of me. You were like,
I'm excited. That's a good thing. We need to have these conversations. These things need to be talked about. You know, it's exactly what you're saying. We're not good at talking about this, so to actually sit down and hear it, it's fascinating to me because I especially don't hear things like this. I currently live in the middle of Arizona, and Arizona is not exactly the kind of place that is willing to have these kind of conversations with the people around you. So it's nice to actually be able to be with people who want to have these conversations.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think my mom is watching, so I'm not going to say what I want to say, but in a more vague point of view, I think especially, people in the same family often have different perspectives. Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of divide in families over the last couple of years. And I think part of it's generational. Our parents, I'm speaking very broadly and in generalized terms, tend to be a little more Republican maybe than our generation.
I would say conservative more than I mean Republican.
Sure, conservative. Yeah, that's a better term for it. Have the conversations. It's okay to disagree with them and try and educate them about why you or me or anyone feels the way they do. They may not listen, but having the conversations I think is really important and then at least you're doing what you can, right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I found during the 2016 election, God, I was like trying not to be political, and then here we are. One of the things that I found during the 2016 election, when people were doing things like cutting off their family members who voted for Trump, for example, and I was like, that's a weird choice. Or it's a weird choice to tell that story as though the cutting off of the person because they're a Trump supporter is actually the reason. Like the reason is a personal hurt, right? Like somebody
Yes.
being personally hurt by their family because of choices that their family has made, that's real. But it is not the identity that causes harm, right? And that for me is the sort of space that's really hard for me. It is not the fact that somebody is white that is the thing that oppresses me. That is, it's not, somebody identifying as something is not the space of oppression. And it is true that there's overlap between the, like, if you identify as a Trump supporter, there's things that there's correlations about that identity, right? But if somebody says, I voted for Trump, for me to come at you and say, you have personally hurt me, is a really dangerous rhetoric to use, because essentially what it means is that your existence hurts my feelings. And that's actually exactly the same rhetoric that somebody would apply to somebody being like, you being gay hurts me. I am hurt by your identity. And that language in any context is just not helpful. And again, from a personal perspective, if you're in a space where you are in a space of unsafety, right, you are in personal danger, those are spaces that are real, and those we need to do our best to help and protect people who are in marginalized spaces. But that is not the same thing when we wax poetic on Twitter about what somebody's experience of self based on the words they use are, if that makes sense. It's a really subtle line, but it's like hugely important to me. And that's actually why I like to talk to people about it, because it's not, I could go off on Twitter on a thread about this particular problem, but it's not as simple, because there are some people who, by voting for Trump, are actively, specifically harming people individually. But the question is not about the individual harm. The question is like, what's happening to our country?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Again, that's a lot to unpack, but I agree with what you're saying.
Do you want to talk about theater?
I do want to talk about theater. I want to ask one other question before we talk about theater. Yeah. So when I said I can't imagine what that's like, and then you called me out on it, which I'm totally okay with, because my goal is always to learn something new and better myself. What is another way I could express what I think you understand what I was trying to express? What is a more constructive way to engage in that conversation and express my empathy or sympathy to your experience as someone who is Black?
Yeah, I think that this is actually a really interesting space, right? Because like you have probably experienced, there are people who are Black who prefer that statement.
Yeah,
right?
I have. Yes, I
have. So I can't offer really to say there is a right way to engage with a person based on their skin color.
Sure.
And that's actually the point that I'm making more than anything else, which is that there isn't actually a script that you can adhere to that's gonna fix this in the future. What you can do is approach it from a space of knowing that your intention is good and that somebody might react as though that wasn't your intention, right?
Yeah.
And that's a continuous conversation. A lot of the work that I begin, diversity work with people by basically being like, my presence as a consultant here doesn't absolve you of what you're doing. My job is not to come in here and like absolve your show of racism. I can't do that. And in fact, I can't even say Black people are going to feel X or Black people are going to feel Y based on what happens in your show. What I can say is, here's how we can step back from what you're doing and think about what you're doing in different contexts and say, is this what you're trying to do? Because this could be what somebody sees. This could be what people think about. And that's actually a continual conversation. There's not going to be a like, oh yeah, if I get 6 Black people in this musical, it's going to solve racism. It's like, no. And again, I'm picking apart your question, not
no.
Look, that it's like it is right or wrong.
Ever have to worry about? I'm here for a conversation, right?
Totally.
Like,
and exactly, and I guess that's my point.
And I'm, yeah. I want to very soon go back to your origin story, but while we're on this topic, I think it's really interesting because on your website it said, and I think you were just alluding to this, you're now a diversity dramaturg, which is not a term I've ever heard before.
No, I sort of made it up
because I co-produced Broadway Bounty Hunter, which was written by 3 white guys. And I'm proud of the show. I enjoyed it, but it had a lot of black characters. And we did bring on someone named Nehemiah Luckett, and we called him a creative consultant. And basically, I think a better term for him would have been diversity dramaturg. So I think it's fascinating that you coined, I think, a more direct and clear term for that role to help white people or other people who are writing black characters who need dramaturgical assistance in making sure that it comes across in a positive way.
Well, and yeah, a lot of why I use the phrase diversity dramaturg is because what I'm interested most is actually how diverse bodies are used in spaces. So when I talk about, I actually mean it from a dramaturgical perspective.
Sure.
This is the story you're telling with these bodies. This is what it means to put this body in this role. And that for me that's why I talk about it in terms of dramaturgy, because it's not like my goal here has never been my goal is fixing racism. But my goal is not to, again, absolve a show of racist undertones or racist problems. It is simply to say there are things that you're not thinking about in the ways that you're using bodies on stage. And often, even when you are thinking about them, you tend to be thinking about them in very, very linear terms. I use a very specific example of like what this looks like, which is I had a friend send me a script, and in the script to read it with this is before I use the term diversity dramaturg, but like that sort of mind is what I was being asked to do. They're like, you're a person of color, can you tell us about this? And I was like, okay. And on the very first page of the script, I pointed out that in the show there are 3 protagonist leads, and the 3 protagonist leads are basically a dude who is the 16-year-old kid. According to the script, he's like Cameron, 16, or Maxwell. That's just what I'm thinking because I see your name. The names were like vague names. Cameron.
Sure.
And they were like, the way that the descriptions happened was like Cameron, 16, Maxwell, 17, Jesse, black, female, 17. And I was like, okay, so look what you've done here. You have decided that this character is defined by these identity markers in a way that your other characters aren't defined by their identity markers. That is white supremacy. That is what's happening here. And my point, and they're like, so how do we make that? But the character's black. And I was like, right. But my point here is not to tell you how to make a non-racist character. I'm trying to show you what you're doing.
Right.
That's for me, and that for me is what dramaturgs do, right? You go and you read the show and you're like, this is what you're trying to do as with your story. Here's what I think you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. I think dramaturgy in general is one of the most understood and underappreciated like skill sets in all of theater. Like you don't hear about them that much. I have considered looking into that, but it's to get another degree, and it's just very expensive. But
it's so expensive. Tell you what.
I digress. So let's move on from this, and we'll come back to it because there's other things I want to talk about. But let's talk about you and your experiences. So one of the things I find most fascinating about you is you have 3 siblings who also perform, and an older brother who's a musician, and I believe your mom is in the space a little bit. So what was it like growing up in a house with all of these, what I can only imagine is like super theater kiddie personalities inhabiting one house?
Yeah, great question. What was it like? I think, we're all very close in age, which is unusual. I always say, for context, there was a point where my mother had 5 children under 5 years old.
Wow. And your sisters are twins, right?
Yes, identical twins. So there's just a lot of us who are like the same age.
Yes.
But in being a lot of us who are all the same age, I think that we also had a sort of interesting stratification experience where like I considered myself very much separate from my older brother's friends and very much separate from my younger brother's friends, even though we're each a year apart in school. So it ended up in this like very strange space where my understanding of age growing up was very confusing because I just was like, somebody who is 1 year older than me is so much older. And like, I remember later when I was like, I must have been 21 or 22, my brother was dating somebody who was younger than my sisters, which was like super confusing to me. But it wasn't, it was like, it was because, my sisters were 19 and my brother was like 24. Like it wasn't like a huge thing in the way that it was in my head because so that for me was the more defining thing growing up with 5 kids. The other thing is that we all like were musicians first. We weren't really theater people until high school. So we weren't like, I mean, we were dramatic. You can see some of our like home videos. It was like a wild thing.
I think I went to your show with your siblings, the Saunders Collective,
and family dinner.
Yeah, I think you guys played some of those clips, which was sort of a scream to watch because it gave me some insight into what it must have been like.
Yeah, and it's funny because like my experience of self is very different than like how people see me because I experience myself as I'm deeply socially anxious and I'm neurodivergent. I'm on the autistic spectrum and like there's all these things about my experience that like I talk about not wanting to touch people. Like when I was a child, one of my best friends had to bribe me to get me to hug her because I just don't like touching people. Like it's just a thing that's been true about me since I was very young. So there's all these things about me that I like think about. I was like, oh, I was like antisocial, but I really wasn't because I was antisocial in relation to my family who were all just much more dramatic than I was. But also in many ways we're not. It was a wild time and it took us a long time to be able to collaborate together effectively. Like we didn't collaborate well. We got along. We just didn't like make things well.
Sure. That makes sense. I have 4 sisters also, but they're much older. So by the time I have cognizant memories of childhood, they were already in college. There's a big gap between us. So my experience was different in that when I was a kid, it was almost like having 5 moms because they were these much older women who I looked up to and learned from and loved. And then when I became 18, 19, it was like a drastic shift where now I got to know them on an adult level.
Right.
And some of my, my sisters are my best friends. So it's so fascinating when you have those siblings. So you said high school is when you first started getting into musical theater. Mm-hmm. Is there like an inciting moment or a show or a song that like sparked that in you?
Yeah, when I was, I played oboe in middle school and high school also. I do a lot of things. Okay, so I was playing oboe, and my band teacher, very, very intelligently, through junior high, was like, if you all want to be a professional musician, instrumentalist, a really good way to do that is by Mr. Brandman. Shout out Mr. Brandman. He was like, there's a really good way to do that, which is playing in pits, being a pit musician. Yeah. In order to be a pit musician, you have to like musicals. So I'm going to show you basically every year he would show us a musical. So my 7th grade year, I think it was Fiddler on the Roof, then My Fair Lady, my 8th grade year, and then West Side Story was my 9th. Wait, something like that. Anyway, the year that he showed us West Side Story, basically the next 3 weeks later, there were auditions for a production of West Side Story in very white Seattle, where they were looking essentially for sharks. So,
yeah,
it was, and I had done a musical, Johnny Appleseed, when I was 10, but other than that, I wasn't really a stage performer. Really, I actually hilariously, if you watch that video of me performing in, oh my god, it was so racist. I was one of the Indians in Johnny Appleseed, which is just wow, American propaganda. Yeah. But you can see in the video my lips during the performance, my upper lip was child chapped, where they get the red ring around the top lip, and so I was literally, you can just see me in the back upstage, just licking my lips repeatedly, not at all paying attention to what's going on, trying to but I was just distracted by my chapped lips, which is what I remember from that experience. Anyway, so when I was in 9th grade, I ended up auditioning for West Side Story with my older brother. My younger brother and I both auditioned for West Side Story. My younger brother was considered too young, but I booked it. And then my older brother was actually just asked to be in it because they needed more sharks. And then it was the beginning of the drama between my getting cast in my family, because my brother was the one who wanted to started being I want to do this, and I was I could do that too. But then I ended up getting cast, and then my older brother got cast without even auditioning, and it was super dramatic.
Trent is the one who wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. Trent is the dramatic one. He's the Leo, if you will.
Well, I've worked with him, and he's wonderful, but yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
So then in high school, you and your siblings wrote a musical, is that right?
Oh, I wrote a musical.
Oh, you
Let's
did.
not give them credit for that, and or responsibility for it.
Okay.
To be very real. Yeah, I wrote a show called Story of Three, which is actually like so on brand. For my 30th birthday, I did a reading of it just because I was like, I'm 30, do this show that I did in high school, which was hilarious to me and no one else. But it was my birthday, so fuck off, I guess.
Yeah, great. What you want?
But I wrote a musical called Story of Three, and Story of Three is like classic early Heath liberal propaganda. Basically, it was about a kid in high school who basically like is coming out of the closet or something, but his whole thing is that he like really doesn't like the concept of being gay, and not in like a I don't like men kind of way, in a like he really didn't like being like the definition was too constraining. It was like it was just like this very me in high school, and I like read it now and I'm like, wow, that is me now. Because like even now I don't identify as gay, I identify as queer because I'm very like weird about words. But like I was like, I look back at this thing and I was like, yeah, that sounds like me. That's
yeah. I find labels way too constricting in all kinds of ways.
Exhausting.
So it is very exhausting because then people have certain expectations. You're like, no, I'm just me, and you don't have to apply these terms to define me because I'm an individual.
Totally.
So then you go to University of Miami.
Actually, before I went to university, God, every time you ask me anything, I'm like, no, really? What happened?
No.
No, so I went to. I originally went to school for composition.
Okay.
At Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington.
Oh.
Great little school. My older brother actually went there, and then I went there, and I went there for one semester, but I was deeply unhappy because I wanted to be a composer of musical theater, but the composition program didn't like musical theater, and the musical theater program didn't like theater, and the theater program was like mad at everybody, and everybody was like mad at everyone. And I was like, but I just want to write musicals. And that was like the whole thing. And what ended up happening is that my mom was like, okay, if you want, I got kicked out of high school too. So that happened, but that's such a long story. I literally can't get into it, but like, anyway, so I don't have a great relationship with academia. And then I was like going to college and I was like, I'm going to be fine. But I, of course, like couldn't get more than like 4 weeks without having like a full panic attack. It was fine. I ended up at the end of my first semester of freshman year at Whitman, my mom was like, if you're not happy, you shouldn't be here. Don't do this. And I was like, okay, which is, privilege in action. But very excitingly, I was like, she was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to write musicals. And so we ended up doing a bunch of research and found out that the only way you can study musical theater, so I wanted to study musical theater, and the only way to study musical theater as an undergrad is really as a performer, because there aren't really writing programs for undergrad musical theater writers. So I was like, okay, so how will I get to a graduate theater writing program? As well, I can study musical theater, and the only way I can do that is by being an actor. So then I like got into my acting roots, and I was like, okay, I'll act. And I like auditioned, did the whole audition circuit, did that, went to University of Miami, because at Miami, I went to the School of Music at Miami, and they basically let me test out of all of the like basic stuff. So I like didn't have to do ear training or music theory. And like I got out of that and used those credits to study songwriting and orchestration and composition and so on and so forth. So I basically had a whole independent study of like the history of musical theater, and I was doing my own thing. Have been most of my life, but that was how I basically ended up going to Miami to study musical theater. And then I was a performer, and then it was confusing, and then I like got out of school and I like started performing, and then people were like, you're an actor, and I was like, I guess I'm an actor. And then I moved to and now here we are.
I think I just got a little whiplash.
Yeah, I feel that's like the best way to tell that story. All this happened, and now here we are. Welcome to my life. That's so good.
So much. It's like I can focus on any particular point of that, but like it happened.
Well, it feels like you had two converging paths. On the one hand, your interest was in writing musicals.
Yeah.
But because of the, I guess, failings or restrictions or rigidity of academia, there was no way to immediately study that. You had to find another way in.
Well, it's it's funny because it connects all of these things together, because really, I talk about how I didn't want to identify as anything as a youth, and like that was my problem with academia, is that academia asks you to be something. And at the time, even in 2006, 2007, being multiple types of artist was not a thing that people considered. They were like, if you want to be an actor, then you want to be an actor. If you want to be a writer, then you want to be a writer. If you want to do these things, then you want to do that thing. And so early on, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I should be able to do different things, right? I should be able to be a writer and an actor. And now everyone's like being like, if you want to write, then write. If you want to act. And I was like, 10 years ago, this was like unheard of. People were like, there is only, you choose one thing and you do it. And like, I'm obsessed with the fact that identity language has allowed people to be multiple things now.
Sure.
Because that's the art, that is what identity is. And if we go into that whole circle about all of these concepts, which is like being a Black person, being a male bodied person, being a, like all of these things that are true about me, being queer, being like these things are just, the me is actually at the intersection of all these things, which is true of my work too. I'm at the intersection of actor and writer and singer, and like all of the things that I do make me who I am. But all those things are just things that I do, which is like chill.
That is super chill. Yeah, it was similar for me. Like I went to film school.
Nice.
And very early on, they were like, do you want to be a director? Do you want to be a writer? Do you want to act? Do you want to do cinematography? I'm like, I don't know. I'd like to dabble in everything, learn everything, and see what I'm good at, and maybe do all of it or none of it. It was so restrictive. So, you know, you had to end up choosing the path you wanted. This was also, 15 years ago.
Right. And the challenge, of course, is you end up in this space where the people who get the best focused training in any individual thing are the people who are willing to say that I am one thing, which is like
free.
So then these programs end up like supporting this very strange way of thinking about the self. And it's like, I don't know if you know, like white, musical theater performers who are just musical theater performers are like some of the worst people. Cause you're like, is this literally your whole personality? And they're like, yes. but that's what we teach. That's what we have taught all together. We're all I bought into this. Like,
well, I mean, even going back to high school, if I think about it, remember when they'd give you like a test and it's like, this is the thing you should do with your life because this test tells you what you need to do. And as the twice college dropout here who still hasn't quite finished because I'm still figuring myself out, like why,
as you should be,
like why waste your time worrying about it and like be yourself. And I think that we really need to break that system because we're at a point, in my opinion, where we're teaching kids from kindergarten on that you need to go to college and you need to know what you're doing early on. And be this person when you don't put people into a box. That's not what we are.
No.
Right. And that what's funny is that what I would say is that you do put people into a box, but that is actually a direct result of the Industrial Revolution that taught that people are cogs in machines and you want to be a cog in a factory. And that is how a life. So the public school system was born out of this idea that we are training people to be better literate workers.
Right.
And so everything about the system is designed towards inflexibility. And I think if nothing else, one, the internet teaches us that like flexibility is everything. Like just being all of the things that make you who you are is what makes you who you are.
Yeah.
And then also that this very rigid way of looking at things has got us into this position where we as a country were profoundly unprepared to deal with this pandemic. Like our system was not ready to deal with this. And we're just seeing the result. And for me, it's like, these are all conceptual things that you like draw together to make this truth. But really, this is just like oh, wow. Everything's connected.
It sure is.
Yeah.
We're taught in America about freedom and individualism. And those two things produce very selfish people. Yeah. So when it comes time to think about the greater good and the greater collective, they don't care.
Yeah. I mean, for like that for me is actually one of the things that I am actively working on in my work as a theater writer is about dismantling what I call the genius narrative, which is the notion that history is a sequence of great men making history. I think that we're really bad at telling stories of true collectivism, where the nature of American storytelling is focused solely on the arc of the individual. So we have the stories that we love are the stories of outsiders who overcame trauma and or problems to change the world, basically. Yeah. And it's funny because there's all these like wonderful examples of this. Most famously recently, Hamilton is quite literally that story.
It is.
And it's like, and it's funny because I put that when I talk about, diversity, we think about diversity as being like, Martin Luther King Jr. rolled up into the world and had a dream and fixed it. But it was like Martin Luther King Jr. did not exist in an isolated box. This is not And I mean, most simply to ignore the influence of Malcolm X or Fred Hampton. Like there's the people who Angela Davis together created collectively
the recently departed John Lewis. All of these people were working together. It wasn't just MLK walking in that bridge in Selma.
Right.
And a lot of people working together.
And in the context of musical theater, you have this weird story that Lin-Manuel Miranda is singularly responsible for the existence of Hamilton. And while I understand that story, and while I value that story when it comes to personal ambition and your personal drive to sort of make whatever it is you want to make, the fact of the matter is that Hamilton existed because of a lot of people. It was actually a collective effort. And the wild thing about it is that the story of the genius individual and the story of Lin-Manuel Miranda and the story of a person of color in white America all together converged to make this perfect story of American exceptionalism that made us all feel good about ourselves. It had nothing to do with the bodies of anybody. And it's like, as we're now finally like, oh, wait a minute, what is this actually telling us about ourselves? Because the fact that even Hamilton frames Hamilton as the hero of Hamilton is like weird, because he's not the protagonist, right? Like the protagonist of Hamilton is Burr, but we have no like a flexibility with the hero's journey as we understand it, which of course comes back to blah 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 blah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're saying is why I take a lot of issue with the notion of auteur theory in filmmaking. Like, it is not just one person who made that film. Everyone from the PAs to people putting out food to the hair and makeup department to the best boy grip to the interns, to everyone put in their time and effort to make that movie what it is.
Right.
It's one usually white male guy who created that film. It was a collective.
Because auteur theory is basically white supremacy, right? Like the two things are tools of one another. They're like, white supremacy can continue to make itself, because even our stories of blackness are stories of white supremacy, right? And this, I don't know if you have you read my article about racism on Broadway?
I did, yes.
So I wrote this article for anybody who might be listening, called "What I Think About When I Hear That Broadway Is Racist," which is about this phenomenon, which is like the story that we tell about racism on Broadway is racist. That was like the crux of what I was trying to say, which is like, when I try and tell the story of myself, I tell a story of racism, and it's crazy for me to try and grapple with that. Right? It's a crazy time.
Crazy. So, this is so fun and fascinating.
I'm learning so much, you guys. You have no idea.
Well, the fact is, when you're dealing with deeper subjects, it becomes increasingly difficult to find elegant segues into the next topic.
Yeah.
That being said, so after college, what was your path? Did you move to New York and start auditioning?
No, so I basically went home on break for college and auditioned for Fifth Avenue Theater and ended up booking what was then called Saving Amy, which became Scandalous on Broadway.
Okay.
So I booked that coming out of my senior year. I moved back to Seattle, and basically was a non-ec actor in the Seattle premiere of Saving Amy, which basically was like, oh, guess you're an actor now. So then I basically lived and worked in Seattle at Balagan Theater, which is now defunct, and Village and Fifth Avenue, which were basically the musical theater houses there. But then I found this weird experience where they were hiring out of town actors because they didn't consider me a serious actor, because I kept going around being like, I want to be a writer. And it made it so people were like, didn't take me seriously as a performer. And then I was like, oh God, look, I'm doing it again. And so I realized that I should move to New York. And that coincided with my brother having just gotten off the American Idiot tour and having booked Aladdin on Broadway. He moved to New York, and my two sisters both graduated from Miami and CMU, and basically they moved to New York. So the four of us basically moved to New York at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And that was how we arrived. And then we were here, and now
you take
here. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily.
Yeah,
we are interested in we're starting a sort of producing arm of our family, which is
that's exciting. It's fascinating how your paths ended up converging.
Yeah, because we tried really hard to be individuals.
Yeah, you can all go your separate ways, and then you end up in New York.
Yeah.
I didn't know your brother was on the American Idiot tour. That's cool. That's a fun show.
Yeah, he played Saint Jimmy on the first
Wow,
international tour.
that's a great role. That's a fun role.
Yeah, he was great. He had a blonde mohawk. He used to be like he. That's funny. My younger brother is like, I always used to joke that he was like the Disneyfied version of me. Like I'm like really hard to like use as anything. But Trent is basically like me, but like easier to cast. And I mean, again, this is like 10 years ago when I developed this story about ourselves. But it was funny because as Trent's gotten older, he's gotten more and more edgy. Like he just like now we're basically like interchangeable in edginess, and it's just like, of course, naturally.
Well, your point to an extent was proven when he got cast in Aladdin, right?
Right. Exactly. And he was an understudy for Aladdin, but he also went through this whole thing because. Can I tell this story? No, I cannot. This is not my story to tell. If you ever have Trent on your podcast, you should have him tell his story.
Yeah, we'll definitely have him on. That'll be fun to hear different perspectives on similar experiences.
Yeah.
So you come to New York and you're auditioning. What did you book first?
What did I book immediately? So when I first moved to New York, I was like, I don't really want to act. I was like, because people didn't really believe that I wrote when I was in Seattle. So I was like, I'm going to be a writer seriously. And then, I realized that the whole thing was all a system. Like the system of writers in New York was all like, we all went to BMI workshop or musical theater writing, the musical theater writing program at Tisch. And there was like a group of them and they all knew each other and they all like had opinions about each other. And I was like, this is a whole culture that I'm not part of.
Yes.
And then the Musical Theater Factory, I found very early on in 2014 or 2015, like in their first year. And Musical Theater Factory really gave me a home as a multi-hyphenate because I was able to music direct and act and write. And Musical Theater Factory was like, yes, do all those things. And so it put me in this space where I was like, yay, I'm going to do all these things. And while I was doing that, I was also auditioning. And I, did this, that, and the other. I did a nymph show. Got cast out of town. And then I almost quit the business completely and then ended up booking Great Comet. And then, that basically like changed my life as a performer.
But before we talk about Great Comet, I really want to talk about, because I'm sure you've noticed the Great Comet window card on the wall.
I did. Oh yeah, I saw it. At first I was like, is that one of those signed posters? And I was like,
is.
Oh, so that's there's my signatures on it.
Your signature is on it, yes. Everyone's is. I got it at Flea Market.
We love.
You did James and the Giant Peach.
Yes, that was when I was in Seattle. Yeah.
That's the one. Who wrote that? Was that Pasek and Paul?
Pasek and Paul. Yeah.
I've heard some of that. It's a fun show.
Yes. Yeah. Weird that I did that. It's one of those things that's like crazy that it happened. But yeah, I did that at Seattle Children's Theater, which was one of the best jobs I've ever done. Truly like delightful. We got to use puppets. It was like the best. And Pasek and Paul were there, and they like Tim McDonald, who wrote the book.
Was it the premiere performance of it?
Yeah, it was. Well, they had done workshopy things of it.
Sure.
But it was the like world premiere of it, which was a lot of fun. And so I got to be the Earthworm. And incidentally, the Earthworm had this whole shtick about not being a man or a woman, which was like my first beginning of like how to start to talk about, like, it was wonderful because I would get these questions from kids and I like started learning how to navigate kids being like, well, if you're not a man and you're not a woman, what are you? And being like, well, let's talk about non-binary people.
Yes, let's.
Which was sort of a delight. I mean, because in the context of the show, an earthworm is literally neither a man nor a woman.
Right.
But it gave this sort of wonderful entry point to talk to like little kids being like, they're like, I'm an earthworm. And I'm like, that's amazing. Yes, we're all earthworms.
Yeah, we are. That's one of the shows that I'm surprised never like made it to New York in a bigger production because it's interesting you bring up the earthworm and the non-binary thing because I vividly remember, and I don't know why, obviously I follow you on Twitter. There was a thread you had, and I can't remember when it was, about your experience trying on a dress. I'm
wearing a dress right now, actually.
Yeah, you look beautiful.
Thank you.
But I was wondering if you talk a little bit about those experiences of finding like comfort in wearing all sorts of clothes and not having your gender, would you consider yourself non-binary?
So let me talk about how I deal with clothing, and maybe
Sure,
we'll
yes.
come to a clearer answer about
Okay.
what non-binary is for me.
Okay.
I love fashion as a concept, and I love fashion in the same way that I love language, because it's you're basically putting on a performance every day. I love the whole, a very famous person has said, you are born naked and the rest is drag. That for me is a thing that I subscribe to when it comes to clothes. So I, in my life, have always been very you can see pictures of me in high school, and it was an interest. I clearly had a sense of fashion, but it was a very interesting one, as is many people. And I've gone through all of these different phases of like what my fashion is, and a lot of it is like making arbitrary choices about the type of thing I like to wear, and then only wearing that thing, whether that's a silhouette, whether that's a. It started when I was a kid because I used to refuse to wear jeans because I hated the way that jeans feel. Again, spectrum-y things about me that are true make sense retrospectively, but there's like things I used to be very, very practical about clothes, whereas like this is comfortable and I like the color of it. So I had these like orange pants that I wore all the time. As I have grown up and sort of evolved my sense of what to wear, I'm like very interested in the story that you can tell by dressing like something, and that sort of began when I was thinking about auditioning, and like when you can change how people see you based on the clothes that you wear, and that's crazy to me. And then I started like really talking, because with what happened with James and the Giant Peach really started a new conversation with myself about my experience of self. And the way I used to describe it was that I don't identify by my gender. Like no part of me looks at myself and thinks this is a man or this is a woman. I don't know how to connect those concepts to me beyond physical traits about myself that quote unquote define gender. But those things don't define gender. I can just like tell you truths about my sexually dimorphous body, but what my experience of that body is not aligned with that, which makes it so people are like, that makes you trans because you're either cis or trans. But for me, I also don't experience any dysphoria of my gender. So I don't have any personal stress with my experience of self, which then put me into the space where I was like, well, doesn't that make me cis in some way? Because if I don't experience a dysphoria, a disalignment with my assigned gender, then am I not whatever? Anyway, so this is all happening at the same time that I'm playing with clothes. And when I sort of get into clothes, I start like, I was like, I want to wear a dress, so I'm gonna wear a dress. And that was like my beginning. And then I like bought my first dress and I was like, duh, I don't know why I haven't been doing this. Dresses are awesome. Like they're a great item of clothing. They're great for the summer. Like, tell you what, I'm like very highly recommend wearing dresses. That all being said, there's questions of safety and identity. So like people perceive me a certain way when I walk down the street in a dress. I do all sorts of gender fluidity because in order to be an actor, I present very male because I don't get seen for female roles. I don't have any intention of, people don't see me and think this is what non-binary looks like. I don't perform androgyny in that specific way. So I tend to, as an actor, play cis male-bodied roles. So a lot of my physical presentation of self is associated with the fact that I play cis-bodied male roles. That's why I care. I have a beard. That's why but I also do all these like weird things because I like keep my nails done, or like I wear earrings, or I have my long hair, which is going to have to go away eventually, probably before the end of this year. So I'm going to cut my hair. That's going to be very exciting. But I do all these things that are like markers of gender fluidity. Which now in 2019 was like right? We loved people who were fluid and rockery and like had this sort of vibe that you didn't really know what to do with. And that's sort of what my performed vibe is. So love wearing dresses, love wearing whatever I want. I love presenting as fluidly as I can. And then there's the question about what are you, right? Which has become a really is a loaded question, because there are people for whom this answer actually puts them in bodily danger, right? And that for me is why I have such discomfort taking on an identity when I am, because like I can walk, because I'm a some odd interpreted male person, people cross the street to get away from me, right? Like I am considered, like I look a certain way, and that gives me certain privileges that I don't want to use those privileges to occupy a space of people who do not have the privileges that I have, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
That's why I'm sort of loath to use the term non-binary, because solidarity with the people who do feel that way, but it would be very easy for me to overtake the conversation that other people have been having because I suddenly use the term, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think that's totally fair and respectable in some way, you know? And again, it's what we were saying before, labels only suit a certain purpose.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You are you, and whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah,
and I'd like want other people to feel comfortable, which is part of the reason that I wear dresses, because if I can wear a dress, then other young people who feel like the dress might be part of their identity may feel empowered to do the thing that feels true to them.
Yeah.
And like, that's a political statement. Like that has nothing to do with my identity. That's a choice that I'm making to try and expand options for other people. And that for me is like, it's a subtle line. Sorry, I interrupted you, PJ.
Oh no, I was going to say, I just think it's really beautiful that you have like such a specific self identity. I think that and you present it in that way, and you're helping people in that regard, because I think there is a lot of people that, because we continue to do that, you need to be this way, you're helping show people that you can be different and be yourself. And I think that's powerful.
That's the hope. We'll
yeah. Well, you know, the world is still strange, but you know, you do what you do, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And again, you look beautiful in the dress.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love a dress.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be against wearing a dress necessarily, except as a heavier man, I don't like the way dresses necessarily look on my body.
I mean, I'm a big advocate for trying everything. Like,
yeah.
That's the thing, is that like I also, one of the reasons that dresses are great for me is because I'm super tall and super skinny, and like this does wonderful things for my line in a sort of macro sense that they're like, oh, we're gonna play wearing a dress.
So let's jump back to Great Comet.
Yeah.
Which is probably my favorite musical ever.
Wow.
I have a tattoo of the chandelier on my arm. Sorry, Mom.
Amazing.
I saw it 13 times on Broadway.
Wait, did she not know that you had
no,
that?
She just hates tattoos, so she doesn't like me talking about it.
Oops. I'm like covered in tattoos.
It's, you know, it is what it is. She can deal.
Yeah.
It's my body, right?
Yeah, but you can't get buried with your ancestors.
Yeah. Not wrong, but I'll deal, you know.
You will deal with that when you get to it.
Exactly right. So you started at ART in Cambridge?
Mm-hmm.
So what was the Great Comet experience like for you from top to bottom? I want to hear it all.
Oh, Lord. Well, Great Comet in Boston was a magical time. Just like, and again, it was coming off. I had a less great theater experience immediately prior to it. So it was also like compared to that thing. And it was like, everything about it was so odd. And I was just so here for that, because writing musicals, so many musicals are just like a very specific thing that I like don't find that interesting, really. And it's not to say that I like musicals that are weird. Like, I like it to be ambitious, and I like them to fail sometimes, and I much prefer that to the good idea musical, well, cleanly executed. Like I was like very excited by Dave Malloy as a creator already, even though I didn't like his work. this is like a weird, I had like a whole terrible experience seeing Ghost Quartet, which had nothing to do with Ghost Quartet and everything to do with my experience with it, which was, and again, everyone on Ghost Quartet, Annie Tip was brilliant, like the director, everything about it was brilliant. I hated it, which had nothing, there was like, those two things are like separate. And I saw it again like 2 years later, which actually helped a lot because then I was able to see the thing in the way that I think it was intended to be seen rather than what I experienced.
Sure.
And so I was like very excited by Dave Malloy. I'd like listened to the Off-Broadway album, and my friend Ken Clark, who graduated from Miami a year ahead of me, was in it. And I like had heard about it, but I'd never seen it. It was just like, I was like, this seems cool. Don't know what this is. And I went in for the audition and I was like, it was like my first audition with Rachel. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. I'm here for it. This is what I want to do. And then I ended up booking it, and I like, and it was just like being out of town and like being in like a weird in cold Boston, and we like everybody was drunk all the time, and like just everything about it was like so what you imagine theater experience should be. It was just like everybody was like, it wasn't like everybody loved each other because they had been doing this, a bunch of them had been doing the show for a super long time, but it was just like a bunch of weirdos being weird. And it was like the first time that I like was in a musical theater setting where other people liked board games. And I was like, oh, these are nerds. And I like, everybody was a songwriter. And like, we did this thing that was like a secret Santa where everybody exchanged their names, but instead of like exchanging presents, you basically got a song and then you would cover the song in a concert where we all covered each other's songs.
Oh, that's
like,
cool.
Surely like this like weird idyllic space that we were all in, and I just like had the best time. And it was like the show is so weird, and it was like interacting with audience, which is like my favorite version of interacting, because although I hate interacting in person, when I'm on stage I like adore interacting with people. Hate being interacted with when I'm in the audience. Love interacting.
we actually my wife has a letter that you gave her at one performance. We still have it.
Oh, is it was it one of my like big letters, like, or is it just like?
No, just a little one.
I mean, did it have like an illustration in it?
Yeah.
Great. So you got one of my good letters.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I have it like in the Moscow Mule mug with like all the shakers. Like we have a ton of memorabilia that we can.
Do you know which one it was?
I would have to go back and look. I can let you know later. I'm sorry.
Great, that'd be amazing. That didn't happen till Broadway, but we did give out letters at all of it's always had the letter giving out thing. We're doing it at ART, had a great time. Everybody's like having a great time. Then we like got the announcement that we were going to Broadway, and it was like, what's happening? I truly was like, my life just got so crazy so fast. I was like, this summer I was deeply depressed and super anxious. And then like, what? Life is funny. And then I went to Broadway, and it was like, okay, cool. And then I was like on Broadway. And then it was like, and it was different because like that show, the Broadway system and what that show is aren't great friends.
Yes, that is. Yeah.
And that I think is the, I joke about it because a lot of people who found Great Comet while we were on Broadway and found it hugely impactful for them. Thank you all. We felt it every night. It was great. Those people tend to come to me now and be like, the show was so good. We were so sad that it closed, as though like in some way I'm personally like wounded by the way Broadway worked. Like the whole thing was like, it's very confusing to me when people like express like, I miss it so much. I'm like, okay, that was an interesting time of my life. And like, now we're in 2020 and they're not the same thing.
Right.
And they're like, yes, it would be perfect for now. And I'm like, in many ways, yes. And in many ways, not so yes. So, so the experience of like doing it was great, but it also was like never sustainable. Like fun fact, after our opening night performance, we not ever once did a full cast, our whole opening night cast ever again for the rest of the performances.
Oh, wow.
Because literally sustaining that show was nearly impossible. People were running upstairs. People were getting hurt all the time. Nobody was doing the same thing. So when you would see a different show if a swing was on, because one my swings didn't do the same track that I did because I did all these like crazy, like there was a whole section where I would like Vogue for a whole section of an audience who would see me Vogue, but my covers wouldn't do that. They would do their version of the thing. And again, this is not taking away from the experiences or the gift or the beauty of our swings or the gift or the beauty of the show in general. It was an amazing explosion of like delight and beauty.
Yeah.
But also we couldn't reproduce it. We were going out there every night and like dropping our lives on this in the space. And that is Wicked, which has been running for, it's 15 years. That show is a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to see it, and when a swing learns a track, they're learning a track and they're able to do that track. And this is not taking away from the brilliance of any of the performers involved, but the show is a machine.
Yeah.
Great Comet was never a machine. It was a burning ball of gas blazing across the sky. And I'm so grateful that it happened. And I'm so grateful that it was on Broadway. There are so much about it that I think was absolutely everything that I want theater to be. And also, it is not shocking to me that it closed 9 months later, because what we were doing. And then, we can talk about the end of, I'm not going to talk about the end of Comet because I think talking about it in context of what's happening right now in 2020, I think it's easy to tell a certain story about what happened that I think is not accurate to what happened.
Sure.
Although I think it is true that Comet fell victim to systemic racism. And I think it is true that systemic racism isn't enacted or represented by individual bodies. It is a systemic problem.
Yes.
It's the Great Comet collapsing under its weight was inevitable and tragic. And also people will say individuals were responsible for that thing, but individuals were simply representative of certain aspects of the situation that we were in ways that made the story easy to tell.
I hear what you're saying, and I wasn't planning on asking about it, and you already said more than I expected, so thank you.
Well, I appreciate that.
But I think it's interesting to hear you describe it the way you did, because that's very much what it felt like as an audience member. Mm-hmm. Not only by pure virtue of the fact that every time you went, you could sit somewhere totally different, and I sat everywhere. I sat on the tables, I sat on the bleachers, I sat at the bar once, and wherever you were sitting, it was a different experience. But apart from that, every time you went, it was a different show because, as you said, I would notice that if there were swings or people covering different tracks, they were not doing the same thing that other people in that track was doing. Different people played different instruments. They had different ways they moved their bodies, and it was nonstop. You guys would have to rush up to the mezzanine at the top to sing, and then be on the stairs, and then be, in the duel in the nightclub. The amount of costume changes alone, I'm sure, was exhausting.
Yeah, it was wild. The show was crazy. It was crazy to be a part of. It was a delight to be a part of. It was exhausting to be a part of. And it just was something. It was something else. It was unlike any show I've done since, had ever done before, and probably will ever do again. And I think that's what makes it great.
You got to go on as Balaga a couple times?
Yes. I also almost got to go on for Pierre.
I remember seeing a photo of you in the costume.
Yeah.
And I was like, is it going to happen?
It was so close. But the set of things that would have to go wrong in order for me to go on. I was the first Pierre understudy, mm-hmm. but it was complicated. But essentially, the number of things that would have to happen for me to go on was at a lot. And there was one moment where it almost happened, and then it didn't, and it was sad for me, but not really for anyone else. It would have been fun. My Pierre was very different than any of the Pierres prior, largely because the body that I exist in, and also because my specific skill set is relatively unusual.
Were you comfortable playing the accordion?
Oh yeah, I'm the playing of the instruments is my thing. That's fine. The weirdest thing about actually playing Pierre was that I had to rely exclusively on my energy as a person, because I can't really rely on my body, because I'm not the right body to play Pierre, which is a weird statement, right? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to not be the right body? But Pierre talks about himself in terms of his like
Corpulent.
schlubbiness.
Yeah.
His corpulent. Like he's and I just am not that really.
Did your costume have like a little fat suit element?
Oh, it had a large fat suit. I'm
large-
just so tiny that it just looked like a normal person. I like I looked very, very average.
That's
it was
funny.
not and these like, layers and layers of costumes. But it was like it was fun. It was fun to like even be close to doing it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I wish you had the opportunity, but things happen when they happen.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, I am forever thankful to you and everyone involved because that show means and meant a great deal to me. It got me through some tough times. I'm a big fan. So.
Well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm also grateful to everybody involved with Great Comment.
Yeah. And then because of it, I got involved in Hadestown, which has been very nice.
Hey, love Hadestown.
Yeah. I love Rachel. She's a very intelligent artist, I think.
Yeah, she's a doozy. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. So, was Alice by Heart your next big gig after? Or
did Alice by Heart happen before or after my Jesus Christ Superstar?
Well, that's what I was going to say. What came first, Jesus Christ or Alice by Heart? I can't remember.
I think it was probably Jesus Christ.
Okay.
I think.
So you were in the ensemble of the John Legend TV version, and then you went to Chicago to play Jesus.
Yes, and while I was in the ensemble of the TV version, I was actually covering Brandon Victor Dixon. So I actually played Brandon Victor Dixon in the first like 3 weeks of rehearsal. So I was playing Judas.
Oh wow.
So I like played Judas for 3 weeks, learned my ensemble track, did my ensemble track, immediately 1 day later went to Chicago and played Jesus. Literally the morning after my the rap party, I got on a plane, flew to Chicago, got off the plane, went to rehearsal, had to sing the temple. It was like
that is
what is happening.
That is a lot of Jesus Christ Superstar all at once.
Yeah. It was a huge amount. But both experiences were extraordinary. Both productions were extraordinary in their own unique ways.
Yeah,
I love Jesus. I love Jesus Christ Superstar. Let's just be like that one on the world. Love the show. Absolutely.
It's probably my favorite. I'm admittedly not the biggest Andrew Lloyd Webber guy, but it might be my favorite of his.
Yeah, I think I can easily say that. Mostly because it is easily one of my top 5 shows of all time. I love Jesus Christ Superstar. And
I think of like the recent resurgence of the live TV musical, I still think it's the best one.
Yes.
The way it was shot, the set, having the live audience, it was just like it all was done the right way. Other ones have had strong elements, but this was, I think, by far the strongest. Like I have gone back and watched it, whereas the other ones, I'm like, I saw it, I'm good.
Yeah. Well, and that's complicated because my sister was in Peter Pan Live.
Peter Pan Live was fun. I mean, Christopher Walken is a joy to watch in anything.
And my sister actually killed it. She played Tiger Lily, which was like
delightful. Yeah.
Which is people are like, she was. Oh my God! Yeah.
I didn't realize that was your sister actually until you just said it. Wow, that's awesome.
Wild.
Yeah, that is
wild world.
But yeah, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I heard you sing. I don't remember what because you do a lot of cabaret stuff, and I know you collaborated a lot with the effervescent and incredible Natalie Walker and Bonnie Milligan.
Yeah.
Was it at one of their shows you sang Gesselmain?
No. So Natalie and I did a show. Natalie and I have this thing where we refer to each other as each other's spouse. So I'm her husband.
The first time I heard it, I believed.
Yes, and people to this day still believe that we are husband and wife, and that she's in an illicit or extramarital relationship with her boyfriend. Which
she is not quiet about her boyfriend.
As she shouldn't be.
No.
Her boyfriend is incidentally one of my best friends, and also the reason that Natalie and I met.
There you go.
But not while they were dating. It's super complicated. We have a weirdly like incestuous relationship. It's wonderful. But so Natalie and I did a show at 54 Below called An Ideal Husband, The Good Wife.
Okay.
And so during that, we had one song where we got to choose what the other person sang. So I made her sing Cabaret from Cabaret, which I had just seen her in at the Secret Theater, which she was extraordinary in. And she had seen me as Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar. So she made me sing Gethsemane.
There we go.
Which is how that happened. And so there's a video of me singing Gethsemane in a concert, which is not it. But, it's a facsimile of the event. If you ever want to see me sing Gethsemane,
I've watched that a couple of times. Your performance is your voice. I mean,
oh, thank you.
You kill it. Another thing I love that you do is Nightmare Before Christmas because I think your Jack Skellington is like so fucking on point. Like,
that's
like that. Those songs get covered a lot in cabarets, and I've never seen anyone do it with like the vigor and like accuracy that you do it.
Yeah, it's funny. Jack Skellington is like for me, he's like, I understand why I was seen as Pierre because of my performance as Jack Skellington.
Okay.
Like, because the hyper intellectual, like self-effacing thing that is Jack Skellington is like my sweet spot. And then when you put on top of that the fact that it's like high character work, which I never really get asked to do because I play this like weird rocker, they're like, you're edgy, and like that's what I do. I'm like paid to be edgy on stage. So Jack Skellington is this sort of like wonderful role that like is just a bunch of things that I like to do and that I do well wrapped into one little opportunity. And somebody like I actually did it at a Great Comet show. My first time doing Jack Skellington, I sang Jack's Lament because Dave Malloy asked me to sing it at a Great Comet show because he's like, this is one of the songs that influenced the show of, and I was like, you really want me to sing Jack's Lament? And he's like, yeah, you'd be great. And I was like, it's like a bass song. And they were like, yeah, it's gonna be fine. And so I was like, I like did it and I was doing it. And I remembered, and while I was doing it, I was like, oh, this is like this is the kind of thing that I really like doing. And then somebody had seen that and they were like, you have to do it with, and Natalie is like, of course, Natalie and I on stage together is a blast. And
yeah,
and so they, you know, Ashley Latimer was like, you have to do it.
Oh, I love Ashley.
So we did it.
She's a good friend.
Yeah.
Everybody knows everybody. It's such a
weird.
Yeah. I want to talk about Alice by Heart, but I also want to talk about your love of horses.
Oh yeah.
Like,
so I love horses.
Yeah.
That's it. No.
Very concise to the point. I love horses. Great.
That's how you want to say
horses.
Horses. Yeah. We can talk about something else, you know?
No. I adore horses. I use horses as the, you know, I allude to my neurodivergence a lot, but one of the things that always have made sense to me is like horses are like deeply sensitive creatures that like for some reason I just like really vibe with them. And that's been true since I was quite young. And I actually once went to Christian camp because I thought Christian camp was horse camp. It was very strange. And it was Christian horse camp, but like, but I was like, I like got there and I was like, oh, this is a Christian camp. But I got to like care for horses. So I was like very happy about that.
Yeah.
Love horses. I think that horses are super majestic, and I think that they're like too good for this world. Like they're so powerful and have so little desire to hurt people or anything really. They're like very chill. I mean, some aren't. Horses have personalities. They're like their own things. But I just find them so. There's something about like power. They're so powerful. And they just like have no consciousness or awareness of it. And they have no interest in like using it for harm. Like there's like something very deeply trustworthy to me about horses. And like, I've always thought that. And then they're also like beautiful.
They are beautiful. That I cannot disagree with. Do you like to ride them or just care for them and look at them?
I used to ride much more often, but I was like, Western style, like there's English style and Western style.
Sure, yeah.
Northwest, and like trail riding was like a thing. So like I would used to go trail riding, and like every opportunity I have to ride horses, I like to take, but it's not like something that I go out of my way to pursue. But if you ever like walking on the street with me and I like see one of like the police horses, which is like, I just like can't talk briefly. It's like, I just like have to like deal with the horse. It's very strange.
Yeah. I think horses are beautiful and majestic. The majestic is the perfect word for horses.
They're like majesty personified.
Yeah. And the other thing that I know you're into is roller coasters.
Yes. Love roller coasters. Roller coasters are like, in addition to loving horses, when I was a child, I wanted to be a roller coaster designer. That was, if I were doing, so there's in an alternate universe somewhere, there is Heath Saunders roller coaster designer.
Those would probably be wild. I kind of want to go on a Heath Saunders roller coaster.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's still something that I like sort of want to do. If I were like a billionaire, one of the things that I would do as a weird glamour project would be just be like build a roller coaster. Like that's just like a thing that I would do. No good reason.
Do you like go to theme parks and ride them a lot?
Yeah, I'm like a Six Flags. I like go by myself. Like when I was in Chicago last summer, I literally I was at Marriott Theater, and Marriott Theater is like 25 minutes away from.
Oh, that was Darling Grenadine, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I had tickets to see it here the day after everything shut down.
Yeah,
Oh man,
it's a beautiful show.
I
Absolutely
it
stunning.
kept selling out. I was so looking forward to it, and then, but I hope it'll come back.
Yeah, Daniel Zajac a special one. He's good, writer of that. But when I was in Lincolnshire, I was like 20 minutes away, so I would literally just like, because I had a season pass, and they gave me a car, so I just on my days off sometimes would just go to Six Flags and like ride a bunch of roller coasters by myself.
Yeah,
it was like a thing that I like.
I have definitely been a theme when I lived in LA and worked in television. I went to Disneyland because we didn't work Mondays. I went to Disneyland by myself every Monday and rode rides. It's fun. I love it.
Yeah, I'm more of a Magic Mountain kind of guy, but
Fair.
you know, I'm a like doozy of a roller coaster.
I'm like not scared and will go on them. For me, the theming and magic is more important to me.
Totally.
So when the roller coasters like marry with that, that's like my ideal.
Yeah, there's a couple of great rides at Universal Studios that do that particularly well. I'm fascinated by theme parks, by the way. Like as far as like storytelling goes, like the Spider-Man 4D ride at Universal is
amazing.
Fascinating to me.
Yeah, really.
Like,
cool.
how did you do this, people? And there's like, you know,
yeah,
I like applied to be an Imagineer when I was like 10. It was like I was ambitious.
Yeah.
I worked at Disney for 4.5 years. In LA, I worked at the Disney theme parks, and I actually used to climb up and down California Screaming all the time back when it was Screaming. Yeah. So it's funny to hear you talk about it. And I'm like, I'm going to see if I can find the picture. I have a panoramic picture from the top of it where you could see the whole park before it had opened. It was so much fun. And like, I love theme parks. They're magical for all the reasons you guys are talking about, especially when they go out of their way. I think of the Mummy ride and how cool it is that it's like, it's a horror roller coaster that's got animatronics, and it's just so much. I love stuff like that. It's a big deal.
Yeah, theme parks are wild. They're also like horrifying, but like
yeah, oh yeah,
you win some, you lose some.
Like totally. I don't want to cast any aspersions, but like the people who are going to Disney World right now, I'm like,
sketchy.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
interesting choice.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm gonna stay inside now.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about Alice by Heart, which I was lucky enough to see and really, really enjoyed. I thought you were so good in it, and then you got a Lord Tell nomination. So I was not the only one who thought you were so good in it.
Yeah, that was wild. I was not expecting that at all. That was very strange to me. Alice by Heart was. It's funny. It is the fastest I've ever booked a role. So I went in one time.
Oh wow!
And I was in the room for like 2 minutes. It was truly like, and then I like booked it. It was very strange.
That doesn't happen often.
No, it pretty much never happens. Yeah. And I am certain that the reason is that my shtick, which is that what you saw me do on stage, that's my shtick. Like that role was such a perfect alignment of the thing that I do that it was just like, that was all that it went into it. There was no, and that's why I think I was so shocked by the response to it, that people were like, oh my God, he's so good. And I was like, I'm not doing anything. I felt like I was giving like the weirdest, like, I don't know. So, and there was like a lot of things about that show that made communication challenging. I had a early on spat with the choreographers, but not because we didn't like each other, but because we just communicate very, very differently. And it like took us some time to work through, because I'm a difficult actor, full disclosure, which is because I don't, and I think this has a lot to do with neurodivergence, which is like, I don't think about human behavior like most people do. So a lot of times I get notes by directors who expect me to understand human behavior in the way that they understand human behavior.
Right.
And so sometimes I'm also like, my whole acting technique is like very strange to watch. I have discovered, because directors, what I'm actually doing in my head is like mapping out human behavior in like a scientific way, where okay, and then a person would turn their head on this line for this reason, and like, it's like literally that detailed.
Yeah.
Which is, I fully accept, is not how most people think. And a lot of that work I do on my own because nobody needs to have a conversation with me about when I lift my pinky. Like no one cares. Like just do the thing or don't. And what will end up happening a lot of times is people will say something like, I use as an example, this did not happen in Alice by Heart, but I had an experience where somebody was like, I need you to, you seem really disingenuous in this scene. And I was like, okay. And cause my instinct as an actor is to be like, yes, I will be less disingenuous. And then I'm like doing this and I like will do that in the way that I know how, which is a set of tools that I use to portray the face that is less disingenuous, which is a complicated notion because that's most people are like, no, acting is like embodying an emotional or a story thing. And for me, acting is like, no, what do you want it to look like? I will make that happen. And then once I know what it looks like, then I live in it. So it's like this weird, like, I like set up what it looks like and then I actually turn it on. So I've actually had a deep frustration with almost every director who's worked with me who during rehearsal is like, why are you marking? And I'm like, I'm not marking. I'm trying to map out my performance. And then once I get to previews is when I can really start working on acting. But so I got this note that was like, you're being disingenuous. And I was like, I don't know what that means. But I didn't start with that. I was like, yes. And I was like, yes, 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 for like a week. And then at the end of that week, my director was like frustrated with me because I wasn't doing the thing that I was being asked to do. And I was like, can you say something else that describes what it is that you want me to do? Because I think I'm doing your note and obviously I'm not. And eventually there was this like thing where it was like, they just said, you're smiling too much. And I was like, oh, you didn't want to give me that note because you think that a physical note is not helpful for an actor. Like an actor shouldn't think about something like smile less. But for me, smiling less is a super helpful note because it's really actable to me. I'm like, I can easily smile less.
Yeah.
And a lot of actors are like, don't give me a note that doesn't mean anything to me like that. And I'm like, no. Tell me where to stand and how to move my thing. I'll figure out everything in between. But like, if you have a specific idea of what something should look like, I need you to tell me what that is, not what you think a person would be feeling in order to do that, because I don't understand feelings like that. Like for me, it's all performance. And so it becomes this like weird communication problem that I have with everyone. And I've gotten better at like curbing it because I'm like, the more I've run into the problem, the more I'll be like with any new director, I'll be like, and no director cares about this, but sometimes, like in Jesus Christ Superstar, I had a whole conversation with my director early on when we were working on Gethsemane because he was like, you're not doing the thing that I'm asking for. And I was like, I don't know what you're asking for. And he's like, he would like try all these variations on it. And I was like, okay, let's try. I'm going to do. His whole thing was he like wanted me to be myself. And I was like, myself is a performance. So I'm not sure what. Yeah. And eventually, like, it was like, he was like, well, what happens when you get mad? And I was like, what I do when I'm mad doesn't read on stage for 3,000 people. So it's not going to be, and he's like, just do the thing. And then I like did it how I would do it. He was like, I see what you're saying. Let's find a way to move from here forward. But it's always that weird breakdown of.
Yeah. I don't pretend to be an expert director, but like I said, I did go to film school and work, made a bunch of short films. And for me, directing, especially directing actors, there's no like formula. It's about finding what works for each individual performer.
Right.
And I've encountered a lot of directors who have their way and then need the actors to come to it at the director's way. And I don't find that to be productive personally.
Yeah, I think it's a tough job. Like communicating, at core in the storytelling, actors they're like paints, sort of. So like for me, I always think about acting as like, in the picture, this character paints this set of colors. And it is my job as the actor to embody those colors in a way that makes it believable to an audience as humanity. But a lot of my questions that I ask are all like really like non-emotional questions, because I'm like, how does this character function in the show? Like, for example, in Alice by Heart, I didn't understand the entrance. They were like, you're coming out of a box. And I was like, I'm coming out of a box? And they're like, yes. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, it doesn't matter. It's like you're coming out of a box. And I was like, but like in the context of this, like why am like what's the box? And that kind of question is obnoxious, right? I am fully, as an actor, admitting the fact that like sometimes you just have to come out of a box, right? Like come out of the box. Once because I didn't have the box in rehearsal, it became this source of frustration because they were like giving me notes on the entrance, and I was like, I don't know what's happening at the entrance. I don't know how to do anything here. So when you give me the box, I'll like start exploring ways to enter in it. I guess I like don't know what. Anyway, and so and they were like whatever they were like we were trying to get a facsimile of what it was beforehand, and it was like frustrating because it was like I wasn't doing the thing and they weren't seeing the thing, and it was like very frustrating because I was like having a hard time imagining what they were imagining. Anyway, they gave me a box, and I was like, oh. And then what I actually did to come out of that box and the way that I came out of the box, which if you saw it, coming out of the box was really cool.
It was cool.
But in order to achieve that, the thing that if I could show you right now how that actually happened, because it was not graceful, but it wasn't graceful because the only thing that I was responsible for is coming out of the box looking the way that I did. So then that for me is what acting is, right? I understand that I need to come out of the box looking a certain way. So I'm going to figure out how to do that. And that involves backing into the thing, like crouched in a tiny position, turning around, lodging myself in the box in a way that I can actually both open the box and stand up in it at the same time, filling the box with smoke because they have this cue that does this thing, can't breathe this whole time. It was a nightmare. But again, it looked really cool. So
it did.
I came out of the box. Acting is figuring out how to come out of the box, and directing is telling you that you're coming out of the box.
You heard it here first. It's all about boxes.
It's all about a box.
All about boxes. So PJ has some like non-related, like I don't know, personality type questions for you. But before we get to that, is there anything else you want to say or talk about?
No, this has been delightful. You're just like asking me. I'm like, I hope that I haven't like seemed like I'm like angry about anything or said anything.
No, and it's been a wonderful, thoughtful conversation. I've had a great time, and I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot to think about, and I hope our audience has enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I want to say real quick, like I've learned so much tonight in a way that I could never have imagined before this, and I just thank you for being here. Number one, before we jump into even the more fun side of the questions, but you've been amazing, so thank you.
Yeah, you've been a great guest.
Thank you.
Of course. So, we were talking a little bit off camera before this, and we were talking about horror movies and things like that. So what was your favorite movie growing up, and what was your favorite horror movie on top of it, unless they're one and the same?
Oh, that's a funny question. Well, so I'm not a film person. And when I say I'm not a film person, it's because I think the thing that differentiates me from people who I consider film people is that I don't really rewatch things.
Sure.
So like once I see something, that's like it for me. I'm like, great, that was fun. With awesome. The exception of Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, which I have seen upwards of 200 times.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Weird defining trait of my youth and obsession with COVID. So the thing is that like my favorite horror movies, first off, couple things. One, I did not start liking horror movies. I did not like horror movies as a youth. I didn't like them. I actually, so I saw part of The Sixth Sense when I was a wee one, and it traumatized me, largely because I hate vomiting. And so the vomiting thing was like deeply unpleasant for me.
Yeah.
And then the reveal of Imagine having a problem with revealing the end of Sixth Sense right now.
At a certain point, there's like a moratorium on spoilers. That movie is well past it, I think.
Yeah, well, it's been parodied to death at this point too.
When he turns around and you see the gunshot, that was also hard for me because I don't like gore.
Yeah,
and because I don't like gore, it basically turned me off of basically all horror because a lot of horror is not all gory, but a lot of horror is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because body horror or things that are horrifying to look at is in fact a whole genre, which we love. I'm very here for. But it took me a while to like recognize that it as an art form and a genre rather than I'm watching people die. Right.
Sure.
Like, and that for me is the sort of differentiation. And then then I saw The Ring when I was 14 and I was absolutely traumatized. Like, so I saw The Sixth Sense, didn't see anything again until while my friends were going to see The Ring. And I was like, I'll go see The Ring too. Maybe I'll be fine. I had nightmares before seeing it. Like the week leading up, there's a version of The Ring in my head that is significantly scarier than The Ring itself, because I basically was like horrifying myself going into it. And I saw it, and I like had to like stand at the back of the theater because I was like terrified the whole time. I saw that movie like 10 years later, and I was like, why was I afraid of this? That's so strange. But that was like this moment when I was like, oh my God, I can't handle this. I'm too scared. There's nothing. I don't understand why anybody wants to be scared. I hate horror, blah, 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 blah. Then it must have been in college. So then I like Wikipedia happened at some point, and at Wikipedia I became obsessed. Actually, Blockbuster, right? So you go to Blockbuster, you go into like a section. I used to go to first off, going to Blockbuster with me was a nightmare because it took me forever to decide on anything. But essentially, what I would do is I'd like go to the horror section and like read the backs of VHSs. Like that was like what my version of horror was. I never watched the movies, but I was like fascinated. So I like knew all of them, but I was like, huh, that's what happens in Halloween. And then, and then when Wikipedia happened, then I would start doing that on Wikipedia. And I was like, now just like knew about. And then I went through this phase in college where watching Human Centipede came out. And it wasn't watching Human Centipede. So there was that weird phase where people like used to trick people to watching gross things, right? Yes. Like Goatsy or like Lemon Party, or like people would like do things that like, no, 2 girls, 1 cup. And you're like watching gross things. Weird time. That was like weird time. 2005 to 2008. Very odd.
Yeah, those were my college years.
Yeah, it was a wild time for all of us.
Yeah.
During that time, I was of course obsessed with reading about horror movies, and I just like loved like traumatizing myself in my head, but like not actually saying the thing. And then I went through this weird phase where I decided that I was going to watch all the movies that were like notoriously difficult to watch. So this at the time included Begotten was one of the first one, and Un Chien Andalou.
Yes. Yep.
And Irreversible. And
that one is very hard to watch.
Yeah. Again, sequences of things that were notoriously historically difficult to watch. This is like what I went through. And this culminated in seeing Human Centipede because it happened around that time. So I basically like went through to inoculate myself. 100 Years of Sodom, Salo, or 100 Years of Sodom.
Salo.
And Serbian film.
Oh, God.
Serbian film.
Oh, wow.
God. Right. And Saw.
And of course, yes, Saw.
I regret watching a Serbian film every day of my life.
Yeah, wild. Yeah. I mean, it actually, what was funny about that time is that I was like, what is happening? Like, why are people doing this? Like, what's going on? And it's funny because I use torture porn, right? Torture porn as a genre, which is a relatively recent genre, or at least isolating it as torture porn, to me is embodied by 2 films. One of which I hate and one of which I think is great, which are Saw and Hostel. And I think Saw is great, and I think Hostel is trash.
I agree.
I agree.
And the reason that I think Hostel is trash is because I think the purpose of Hostel is to gross you out by seeing violent things. It is the child of a Serbian film. It is a child of the extremity that was this genre of film that was apparently, there's probably a word for this, but it was literally like, let's make you uncomfortable, and that's what we're going to do. It's funny because that's a technique, I would argue, that I think is really applicable sometimes. I think that the unpleasant part of Irreversible is deeply connected to the actual film and the story of Irreversible. Having the experience that is that insane 9-minute sequence in the middle is part of what makes the film the film. Why is that different from Hostel? Not really sure. I think it's just a personal aesthetic thing where Hostel seems like the entire story was simply designed to give us an excuse to watch people torture each other, which just was like, not here for it. I hate it. And so I was going through this phase where I was like watching things that were really difficult to sort of inoculate myself from watching those things. And at that point I was like, okay, this is insane. And then I started watching horror movies again. And that's when I saw The Conjuring happened around then, which I loved. Yeah. And Conjuring 2, I also loved. The Insidious series, I had a really great time with, which is probably my favorite genre of film, which is like of horror film, which is like the possession and or like haunting.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that like between Saw, Insidious, and The Conjuring, you've literally just named almost all the very popular James Wan series on top of it.
Yeah.
Because,
Don't get me started on James Wan, who I think is brilliant.
yes, he's currently my favorite working director is like in the new group of.
Great. I mean, James Wan. I am like, because the
I'm ride or die James Wan. Yes,
truly, his work as a filmmaker is absolutely shockingly good. Like, it's like, why is this so good? And then you're like, oh, James Wan has this weird aesthetic that I'm here for.
And he did Aquaman too, which was
Aquaman, which was bad, but but the film, the sequence in Aquaman when he's swimming, the thing,
the trench,
Yeah,
I'm obsessed with James Wan.
No, I am too. I mean, like in you bringing up Furious 7, one of the things that's so fascinating to me, every time I rewatch it, I realize more and more that he made Jaws with Jason Statham as the shark, and that every time he pops up, he's literally just there to be destructive, and then he disappears again. And I love that.
It's funny.
The thing is that I think it's a weird aesthetic alignment because I just think that I like the same things that James Wan likes. That's like my theory about it, that he just is aesthetically aligned with me. There are a couple of directors who fall like that. Christopher Nolan, I think, is aesthetically aligned with me.
Yes.
Denis Villeneuve is probably my aesthetic spirit animal. Arrival is probably my favorite movie on the planet.
Arrival is stunning. Absolutely stunning.
I would probably say it's my favorite movie. Also because I'm obsessed with language. Obviously, it's all of my.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see Dune. Dune was like one of my favorite books as a child, and I'm like, if anybody's going to do it.
At this point, I don't know when we're going to get to see it, but I'm sure it'll be worth the wait.
Yeah. Well, again, Denis Villeneuve is like awesome. I'm obsessed. I just been like, this dude is the best. But James Wan, I feel the same way about. So when I think about horror movies that I like, that's sort of the vibe that I have. Mm-hmm. As I've gotten older, I've seen more of the classics. So like I understand more of like what has happened in horror and why things exist the way they do. And horror is like one of the reasons, and what I was going to say is why I like horror in the same way I like musicals, is that horror as a genre is self-referential and self-loving in the same way that musical theater is. So it's a genre that is defined by its being outside the serious genre of the film. So like film is serious and horror is not. Mm-hmm. And horror has created its own culture of references and concepts and stories that are actually based on its own understanding of itself. So this is like Scream, which I thought was a horror movie when I was younger. I have since learned is not really a horror movie. No. Scream is more like, I mean, it is, but like it is more like Cabin in the Woods, which was again the sort of when you track like the journey of the films that like are self-referential to that history, that story. That to me is like musical theater, which is actually deeply self-referential in the same way and loves itself because the rest of its genre doesn't like it. And they've both created their own like story of this weird. They both require such an extreme sense of suspension of disbelief and such an extreme love of fantasy and the fantastical and like an unreality that gets closer to the story of true humanity than others. To me, horror movies and musicals are like the same thing. But again, I don't like rewatch movies. So the things that I like call my favorite horror movies are the ones that when I saw them, I had an experience that was satisfying and pleasant, which is funny because like take for example now this is you want to nerd out. Take for example Ari Aster.
Oh yeah.
These I hate, and I don't hate them because I think they're bad. I think they're very 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 good, but I also think they're super cynical, and I don't like cynical art. I as a person, and this for me is why The Conjuring is really interesting, because The Conjuring is really not cynical. It's actually deeply about like the power of goodness in a like weird intrinsic way. And for me, Hereditary and Midsommar are both like, wow, you hate life. Like that which is humanity is gross. And like, okay. You can say that. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say they're not good. Like the movies are great. He's clearly a great filmmaker. Although I think like the first like 3/4 of Hereditary are like masterpiece level, and then like the last arc of it is like
a nightmare fuel of being confused and strange. Yeah.
I just I didn't buy it. You know what I thought was going to happen in Hereditary, which I was super here for?
I want to know because you're the first person in a long time I've talked to who doesn't like that movie as much as I don't. So this is kind of nice for me to actually feel this, because I'm used to everyone being like, it's a masterpiece. And I'm like, it's well made, but it doesn't do anything for me.
Doesn't do it for me. Well, so what I thought Hereditary was going to be about, and if I were, again, and this is, again, I do not want to say that Ari Aster is not a great filmmaker. Dude made his movie. People love it. Super here for them.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that Hereditary, what I thought was going to happen. Can we talk about what happens in Hereditary?
Yes,
on this?
absolutely. This is spoilers, you guys. At this point, you've probably seen it if you're here. So
at the beginning, what I thought was the twist of Hereditary was going to be was that the daughter didn't actually die. That it was the story that the mother's version of the event was the reason that the mother's relationship with the daughter was strained was because in the mother's version of the events, the daughter died, which I thought was going to reveal what happened to her mother to her. So the event was going to be that the horror of the movie, which is that this mental trauma that is actually passed on from mother to daughter to daughter to daughter, is actually an inherited trauma that creates the sort of horrifying world that creates the thing. So I literally thought that the twist was going to basically be a shifting of the opening sequence, the sort of opening part where we like see the mother, Toni Collette, dealing with her relationship with her mother. I thought we were going to see basically her daughter grappling with the death of her mother in the same way, which was going to then create the hereditary horror, which is going to basically create a world for her daughter. That is what I thought the movie was going to be about. And that is the movie, literally for the first 2/3 of the movie, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this. This is amazing.
And then he does something very different.
And then he went off on this payment thing. And I was like, so...
I would have loved that version of the movie. I'm not going to lie.
It's like, to me, a movie that does this extremely well is The Babadook. I think The Babadook handles the horror of the reality of single motherhood in like an extraordinary way. And like the horror movies that I truly adore are the ones that explore humanity. Because it's not about, when I say something cynical, it's not that I think that it's like negative, right? Like it's not cynical, like it's not that I don't like tragedy. It's that I don't like a story that like reaffirms a sense that like the world sucks. It to me is the difference between, I actually think the Batman trilogy and Dark Knight and Breaking Bad are not the same kind of gritty. I think Breaking Bad is explicitly about how terrible things are, and I think that the Dark Knight trilogy is about how terrible things can be. And like, to me, those are different energies. And that's why for me, that's actually Christopher Nolan cracks me up, because I think Christopher Nolan is a cynic who creates optimistic art, which creates this like, and it's funny because that's when he fails most miserably is like in Interstellar, that weird love monologue where you're like, I'm sorry, Anne Hathaway, what? To me, Nolan, that is like watching Christopher Nolan try and work out his own cynicism in an optimistic way. And I was like, okay.
It's so interesting to me because I've always felt like only Christopher Nolan could try to turn love into a binary number. You know what I mean? Like you look at someone like Spielberg, who clearly, if he was originally supposed to make that movie, and if you watch it through those eyes, you're like, I can see him doing something where he deals with it in a very real way. And Christopher Nolan's like, it's all numerical. And you're like, what the fuck just happened?
Well, but that's the thing, is that like I think everything is numerical, and I love that Christopher Nolan tries so hard to prove himself wrong.
Right.
It's like The Prestige is fascinating because it's so bleak, but he like spends the entire time being like, make great things, like do magic is worth it. And I'm like,
another more recent horror movie that I think does what you like well is Lights Out.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know if you've seen it.
I think the short film of Lights Out is brilliant. I think the long film of Lights Out is less good.
Fair enough.
I don't think that's wrong.
Here's why. I agree. I have seen it. I thought I was going to really like Lights Out, but Lights Out to me was like Mirrors, where it actually. Did you see Mirrors with Kiefer Sutherland?
Yeah.
The movie's a disaster.
Yeah, it's very bad. I agree.
And if you want to talk about, actually, quick tangent, you want to talk about unnecessary gore, that scene when she's in the bathtub and her face gets ripped off was so out of left field in Mirrors. I was like, are you joking? Like, there is no, you don't, stop. And that's the kind of graphic violence that I hate.
Sure.
Which, on the other hand, I think that the graphic violence at the end of Hereditary is actually earned. So I think the graphic thing that happens at the end of Hereditary was not disturbing to me in the same way that the graphic thing in Mirrors was, because it was like, whatever. Lights Out, however. Mirrors, the problem with Mirrors is that the actual concept of it doesn't actually make any intellectual sense, and it spent too much time trying to explain the intellectualness of it. So, and Lights Out was dependent exclusively on the brilliance of the sequencing in it, which is like the swinging lights sequence, or like the lights flashing on and off. Those kinds of things are excellent horror craft. I mean, like, truly, like I can watch that now knowing full well what's going on, and I still get profound anxiety watching it. It's like, we're all going to die, which is, I think, that kind of delicate, that writing that line.
Right.
Unfortunately, Lights Out, like Mirrors, left me with I'm sorry. So how much light does there have to be in order for this to not work? Or
Fair.
And in the same thing, that was the same thing with Mirrors, because it was like, how reflective of a surface are we talking? Because is it a doorknob that's going to be a problem? Like, my TV reflects things. Would my TV be dangerous? And Lights Out and Mirrors both basically tried to hand wave away the things. So they would explain it enough to make a sequence scary, but then it would like collapse under the weight of the implication of what it was saying, which to me ready for a random leap.
Yes.
I would use this. I would liken it to, do you ever remember that TV show Kyle XY?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He had no belly button.
Yep.
Kyle XY was almost brilliant. And then it actually failed under the weight of its. To me, I like watched. There was it was 3 seasons, and then it got canceled. And it was before people had like arcs planned out years in advance. It was before what I call the Lost effect, when suddenly people like had like 12 seasons in their heads.
Yeah.
And there's this hilarious and Kyle XY got worse and worse and worse. The first season was actually quite interesting, and then it was like the second season was like there was this weird thing of like them trying to like, there was those 2 women, one of whom was like his adopted sister who he was like in love with, and like the other was like Jesse XX, who he was also supposed to be in love with. And the whole show sort of became this weird thing where it's like, are we supposed to be with the ones who we truly love, or the ones who are meant to be with us? And there's this insane interview with the showrunner, if they had those back then.
They did, yeah.
Basically, where they're talking about it, and I was like, oh, you are. This is a horrible thing to say. But I was like, you're not the kind of intellectual thinker that your character is. So you have written a character who thinks faster and more complexly than you are thinking as the writer. And it's not to say that that's impossible, because we can create characters. Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen is smarter than anyone who creates it.
Sure.
You can create those characters. But to try and write a show about Dr. Manhattan specifically would crumble under its own weight, because the writer would show itself, because there's no way that you're as smart as the character that you're writing. And eventually you start to realize. And so my experience watching season 3 of Kyle XY was constantly angry.
I didn't make it that far.
Yeah, you shouldn't. It wasn't good. But I was constantly angry because I was like, Kyle XY is too smart for this shit. He wouldn't be doing this. Like, this doesn't make like, why is he behaving like a twat? And I get really mad about it. I hate it when people who are supposed to be smart like aren't smart.
Yeah, I get that.
I'm curious, because you brought up Dr. Manhattan. Did you watch the Watchmen TV show?
I haven't yet. It's on my to-see.
Okay, I'm very curious to hear what you'd think after you watch it, because the way you brought that up, that there's a very clear picture of what you're kind of talking about, and the idea of trying to make a show. And I don't want to spoil a lot, but it revolves around Dr. Manhattan.
For sure. What I having not seen it, and I can't speak to what they do. What I mean is Kyle XY was the protagonist of Kyle XY.
Right.
Dr. Manhattan is a cipher, which actually allows you to imbue his intelligence onto him, which actually is a cool skill.
Yes.
Because it means that he actually represents something that we don't ever really say. And for me, that's like it's why I don't like movies that are about geniuses, Like I find them deeply unpleasant to watch usually because I just am like, if you were really that smart, why are you so terrible? Cough, cough, hack, hack, The Social Network.
Yeah, I was gonna say that seems like a very specific Mark Zuckerberg reference right there. But who knows?
I also think that The Social Network, David Fincher's brilliant filmmaker. Like,
yes, absolutely.
Movies that I thought were brilliant that are genre busting. Gone Girl, I think, is a brilliant.
Gone Girl is brilliant. Yeah. I find that to be a comfort movie. Interestingly, it brings me a lot of comfort.
I love that for you, and I also find it kind of disturbing. I found that movie so unpleasant to watch in the best way.
Oh, it is unpleasant. Don't get me wrong.
I was shocked at how much I liked that movie.
Yeah, I think it's such a great flip on everything we know that genre to be, and it just plays it so well. In a way, it's like Fight Club, but in a more interesting way.
Right.
Like I think it has more to say than Fight Club actually pretends that it has to say.
Instantly, I think that Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn. This is a weird thing. It's a little bit like, to me, the kind of writing that she does is actually very similar to Chuck Palahniuk, in the sense that what she actually, I don't know if you've read like Sharp Objects or read Gone Girl. Or
I have, and I've read a bunch of Chuck, like Haunted and
Choke.
Choke. I have a hard time with his books. I think he has interesting ideas and really bizarre, sort of tiresome execution.
Chuck Palahniuk, I think, is a little bit like Tom Six, where I'm like, you really just like making people uncomfortable. Literally, I'm like, why is this happening?
Which was there was one, I can't remember what it's called, where it's literally about guys waiting in line for a gangbang.
Oh, he did a short story called Guts, which he explicitly wrote to make people stop him from talking. Like he would like read it at his he would do talks on things and like people like vomit because it was so gross. I mean, it was literally about a guy jerking off in a pool, sitting on a vacuum, and then his.
Yeah, Chuck's an interesting fellow.
But
that book I was referring to is appropriately called Snuff.
Yes. But like, so for me, Gillian Flynn, the reason that I draw a line from Gillian Flynn to Chuck Palahniuk is not because I think that they're doing the same thing really, but that they both. Gillian Flynn writes books that are just like. I think that she like overdoes cynicism because she's not as cynical as her books actually are.
Sure.
There's like Gone Girl's, everybody in Gone Girl is terrible, which is like kind of the point.
Yes.
But like for me, there's a difference. Again, there's a difference between Gone Girl, which I think is almost deliberately fantasy. Like it's not real. And it's very clearly not. And the Breaking Bad, which is saying that the world that we live in is gross. And that to me, there's such a subtle line between those two things. But like, and to be absolutely clear, this is absolutely me talking about my aesthetic, right?
Right, absolutely.
There's no real objectivity in one's opinion of art. It's all personal, right?
It's a conversation that Maxwell and I have frequently because there's so many people who think that art is, again, kind of what we were talking about earlier, is like it's objective and binary, and it's like it's not really that way.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that are bad.
Yes.
I think you can like talk about bad craft and like that.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure.
That for me is like this is bad craft. Like if you want to talk about Jurassic World, like Jurassic World is a badly crafted movie. And that just makes me angry. I'm like, why? God. Anyway.
No, and that's fair. Like there is objective, like look at The Room, and yet we still seem to love, ironically, The Room for being as bad as it is. So, there's always that give and take.
Yeah, The Room to me is the same track of like Napoleon Dynamite.
Sure.
Which is something that I like. It's a kind of humor that I don't really get.
Right.
Like I never. It's.
No. Yeah, I get it.
Don't get it. And I like accept it. Like people like it, but I also don't really get comedy as a general rule.
That's fair.
The funniest movie I think I've ever seen in my life was probably Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
That movie is brilliant. We actually did a watch along for it on the channel
just a couple weeks ago. It's real funny.
I don't think I've laughed harder when he does when he names the thing and he's like the fleur.
Yep.
And he's like, then they're trying. I truly could not handle that whole sequence. I just was like, this is the funniest thing. And that's That's Phil Lord and Christopher.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
And they are brilliant.
they are.
They
I'll
are
give it to them.
incredible.
I love the
They're
21 Jump Street movies. I think they're so funny.
They're so much better than they have any right to be.
Any right to
Everything-
be.
Yep.
But that's
Any
true
right
of the
to be.
Lego movie too.
Yeah.
Yep.
To be very
I
clear.
sort of think that's their like MO is like taking a concept that on paper seems questionable and making it very, very good.
Well,
Yeah,
that's.
Go.
Oh, sorry, not to step on you, Heath. I was going to say is that they did a TV show, and I plug it every time we talk about them. It's
Clone
called Clone High. Yeah, and I love Clone
And
High.
it's coming. It's coming
Yep.
back. They're making
I know.
more.
I'm a little worried about it, but of course it's going to be them, so it's going to be fine. But like, the second or third episode of Clone High, which is the Electric Boogaloo
Yes.
thing, that when the three like people from the agency are like,
Yeah.
this is the thing, and then they're like, this isn't gonna be it. This is gonna, and it was like, my mother hasn't spoken to me in 10 days.
Yes.
Like, that is like my style of humor. I was like, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. I truly like.
You know.
My-
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say my favorite part about those characters too is that because Bill Lawrence is also involved with that show, those three were Donald Faison, Zach Braff, and the girl who played Elliot in Scrubs. So they brought them over to work on it, and that was all of them together.
Oh, that tracks.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Fantastic.
that tracks.
Well, you know, there is so much more we could talk about.
I know.
but-
2 hours later.
Yeah, we've been going for a while. Maybe we'll do this again sometime, and talk about all the other questions we could. But it has genuinely been a true pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
That's been my pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Heath. It was just the best. Thank you.
Is
I'm
there
glad that I got to have like full on nerd out conversations with both of you, but in different lanes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I was like, Maxwell and I are like dominating the conversation right now, and then I was like, okay, great, now we can just like yell about them.
that's sort of how we structure it. Like I
Yeah.
do the theater stuff, PJ learns, and then when it comes to the other stuff, I hand it over.
Okay.
Because I really am, for this part of it, I'm the glorified sidekick, and then we shift into this side because, like, full disclosure, I write for a movie trivia show on YouTube. That's my job. So as you can see, I
I
kind
was
of like
gonna say
movies.
no one would ever
Yeah.
be able to tell you like movies based on what's behind you.
But I also love Broadway, which is why I have like the window cards at the top that you can kind of see. And so I learn a lot doing these too, because I'm still kind of getting back into the theater side, and I love being able to have the full conversation, and I listen, and I love that, and then I get to nerd out with you at the end.
Yeah. You got to nerd out. You got to nerd out about horror movies.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where I'm like, most people who love musicals should love horror movies, and I'm like big on like proselytizing about it.
I love that we had this conversation about it, because it just opened up so many potential ideas in my head, and we're like, wow, this is so true.
And I do think you gave some graduate student out there a brilliant idea for their thesis comparing musicals and horror films.
I
Yes.
tell you what, I hope so.
Is there anything you want to plug? Where can people find you online? Where can they follow you?
I'm always Feel the Heath. At Feel the Heath is my like online things. I think it's worth checking out my family at thesaunderscollective.com, which is a nightmare. We are delightful and horrifying. You can listen to my EP on Spotify, which does not play well with others.
It's really, really good.
Oh, thank you. It's very strange, but it's like me. It's
but strange in a delightful way. I'm trying to remember what show you played a song for it, and it sort of knocked me out with how delightfully weird it was. Maybe one of Philip Romano's shows.
Was it the Leap Day show?
That's exactly right. The Leap Day show. Yeah,
that was so strange because he like didn't tell me what I was supposed to do, and I like didn't know what was, and I was like, I'm just gonna sing this song, and then it was like, I was like, what's happening?
You like came up with your laptop and a little mixing board, and you're like, here we go.
This is what we're just gonna do it.
Yeah,
which is like the story of my life as a general thing. But again, I think that if you connect everything that we've said before, I think that everybody in the world is a weird and delightful amalgamation of a lot of weird and delightful interests and a lot of weird and delightful identities. And I think that the more we can take the opportunity to acknowledge ourselves and to acknowledge other people's and to find shared language with which to sort of have the discussion that you want to have at that point, that's going to be the like art of the changing the world, as it were, because it's about targeting the language that we use and choosing to use different language, because we can't change how we feel, but we can change what we say.
Totally. That Beautiful. What a beautiful note to end all this on, to be honest. I don't know how we
Wrapping
even
it
go
up.
up. I don't know how we ended any better than that. But thank you again so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
And feel free to come back anytime. We're always around.
It seems like it.
Yeah, we're always working. But thank you again, Heath. We'll see you soon.
Cheers.
All right. So, Maxwell, we did it. How you feeling?
Did. Oh,
I got it.
I thought that was just absolutely wonderful. Heath was as great of a guest as we could ask for. We have a lot of other exciting stuff coming up on the network, but we will be back with another episode of Front Center Mezzanine 2 weeks from today, which is Thursday, August. I don't know off the top of my head.
I can look. Give me a second. I can calendar this while we sit here.
Thursday, August 6th.
Yes.
We have an exciting guest that I am not prepared to announce as of yet, so stay tuned to our social media channels, and we will be announcing that guest soon. What else do we got going on the network, PJ?
Yeah, just real quick, guys. We're going to run down this real fast. Once again, tomorrow, come watch Tomorrowland with us as the Brad Bird month comes to a close, with this being our last live-action Brad Bird film. But we also have The Incredibles and The Incredibles 2 on Monday. We will be starting that a little bit earlier than we normally do. Again, 5 o'clock on Monday for
5 o'clock Pacific.
Yes, Pacific.
So 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yep. Of course, you guys come back, watch Rocket Man's Suddenly soundtrack. That was released yesterday. You can find that over on the channel. And then next week, we got Newsies going on, which is going to be so much fun. You guys will have to come back. Kevin Smets, once again, who was in the original Newsies show, or movie, I should say, he's got a lot of insight to talk about it. So you guys are going to enjoy that a lot. And, our big thing, the thing that I'm very excited about, Scary Movie Squad. Yep, Scary Movie Squad. Look at all those people. Look at all those movies. So much to break down, so much to talk about. There's so many that I can't wait to watch with you guys. I'm going to keep talking about how much I love Haunt, and I can't wait for you guys to see it, because I know so many of you haven't. It's going to be so much fun. But Cabin in the Woods, Sleepy Hollow, The Conjuring, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Scream, Friday the 13th, Poltergeist. There's just so much goodness. Yep. But of course, the Halloween double feature of Trick or Treat and Halloween 2018 is going to be a blast. And then I'm sure this will be a nightmare. But Family Feud 2, I don't know why we're doing it. I guess much like Psych, we thought that we could remake our own episode and hope it was better.
It can't be worse.
Nope. All right, Max, where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at CinemaXwell. Instagram is at CinemaXwell Inc. You can always find me around here on the PJ Campbell Network. If you're not sick of my face yet, I know some of you probably are. Deal with it. Love you all. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, and of course, you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at PJ_Campbell. You can find me writing over at the Movie Trivia Schmodown. If you have not already, please check it out. We're just finishing up this IG tournament, and we're going to be heading straight into the singles and teams to close off the year. And I mean, this is the biggest tournament we've ever done. 36 players plus 4 play-in matches. Like, there's a lot going on. It's a good time to be a Movie Trivia Schmodown fan. So thank you guys for the continued support as always. Without you guys, the show doesn't exist. So please head over to YouTube where you can find the show. But with that, we're signing off. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Have a great night, guys.
Out there, guys. Wear a mask.
Wear a goddamn mask. Thank you.